How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
This week on the show, we're discussing David Lean's 1962 epic drama, Lawrence of Arabia, which we saw at an AMC in Las Vegas for fun. Let it be recognized, we have a funny sense of fun, because this film's damn well long. But the trick, Parker Rawlins, is not minding that it's long.
Yes.
I don't remember what his accent sounded like, Parker. It was days ago. Parker, I've said your name several times.
You have.
Would you like to speak on why we chose this for the podcast? Why are we talking about Lawrence of Arabia on this podcast?
Sure.
For those who may not be in the know.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring this to the podcast because it is a very well-regarded film within kind of the general lexicon of film history. It not only had a really great run at the Oscars that year, as well as several other award shows, which we'll get into. Additionally, it is also part of the National Film Registry of the United States, which is a space for culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant films.
I'm glad you're bringing up that. I had looked into this. Only 43% of our previous contenders have achieved that status of being in the National Registry. Yeah, 43%. And also, I feel like it's something that we really should have been taking into account this entire time, because we have a criteria piece on this podcast. If this is your first episode, we have 3 pieces of criteria, and one of them is it culturally or historically relevant?
Yeah, which I stole whole cloth from this. Did we never talk about that?
We've never said, like, when we talked about Titanic, we were never like, I think we did reach the conclusion that it was culturally significant, but I don't know if we mentioned specifically that it was from the National Film, because like even things like Fast Times is in the National Registry.
Yeah.
And like, you know, Ratatouille isn't, which is fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I'm just glad you brought that up with this because I was like, oh, that's something we should talk about probably a little bit more going forward. So anyway, yeah, 43% of our previous contenders.
Interesting.
Not even 50. So.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, so it was, just taking an objective step back, that was kind of the reasons I wanted to bring it on as kind of an equivalent cultural juggernaut. My grandparents know what Lawrence of Arabia is. In the same way that everybody knows what Citizen Kane is. And so I thought it would be interesting to bring on. Outside of just the objective reasons, subjectively, I just really like this movie. And I wanted you to see it. And this is a good excuse to make somebody watch a 4-hour movie.
Yeah, the podcast is great for that. I recommend anyone out there who's trying to convince their friends to watch the movies they like, just start a film podcast and then force your friend to watch them. This is a film that Parker likes. Nerd. Parker, what's your history with Lawrence of Arabia then? Because you watched it. Was this one of your like you're in the bedroom?
This
is
on
the TV.
This is early film education for me. Probably 13 or 14. Picked it up from the library. And yeah, just like watched it in my room and really loved it. And then would like that same week that I had the movie, I'd bring it downstairs. I had it downstairs on like a Saturday while everybody else was doing stuff after I'd done my chores. I think my parents would kind of like peek in and like, why is our 13-year-old watching a 4-hour World War I epic? It seems odd. I would be curious to know what my parents were thinking at the time.
Let's bring them on.
Yeah, hey, Kirk, Jackie.
Is it too late? Is it too late to call them in? Can we just have them?
Like,
can we call in?
Mom, what did you think?
You're on the podcast.
You're on the podcast that you don't listen to. What do you think?
Yeah, this was also on number 5 on the AFI 100 in 1998, and in the 10-year 2007 when it dropped down to number 7. And interestingly, because this podcast kind of started when the BFI released their 2022 version of their Sight and Sound list, which is like, they poll a bunch of film critics and directors and everybody and kind of determine what the greatest films of all time are. And since the AFI doesn't do that anymore, this is the most relevant list we have. Lawrence of Arabia is number 133.
Yeah. Which
is low.
It is low. And you know, I've looked through the list. There are really good movies above it for sure, but I having grown up seeing it listed in the AFI and so many other like listicles of like greatest movies of all time, it's always in like the top 10. So when you told me that, I was like, wow, that's surprisingly low.
Maybe this is like a rare example of the British being like, we just aren't that great. Maybe that's not that rare, but like maybe they were just like, guys, it's really time that we put other people's movies above ours.
On, we gotta...
They just when they created the list, they just caught them on a day when they were like feeling really down on themselves, and they were like, guys, our movies suck. Let's just put them lower. Just put them lower, guys.
Just drop it down.
Just make sure that like, you know, Jean Dielman and like Kurosawa films are above ours. I just feel like that. Yeah. That's what deserves the spots, and they're not wrong. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is just surprising how low it is.
Yeah. What is your history with this film, if any?
Yeah, my history with this film is that I knew of it.
That's fair.
I knew desert.
Mm-hmm.
I knew man. And that's basically
the age-old story, desert and man.
Man versus wild, if you will.
Goes back to the Bible.
Except,
you know?
That's true.
Yeah.
It was. This is kind of a biblical epic. That's something that's kind of interesting to me about Lawrence of Arabia, is that it reads as like a sword and sandals epic.
Absolutely.
Of the time, but it was set in like, I honestly, before I saw this movie, I didn't know when it was set.
Mm-hmm. I
had assumed it was like some sort of, again, it just had like the look of this kind of biblical epic to it, which is probably has more to do with the aesthetic of like men on camels, men on horses, war.
Mm-hmm.
But like, until like this year, when I've kind of learned a little bit more about it in the lead up to watching it, if you had asked me, when is Lawrence of Arabia set, I would have been like, I don't know, long, like 300 years ago. You know, like, you know, like I didn't know that he was a general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he was.
He was
a real guy too.
He was indeed.
I also didn't know he was a real guy.
Yeah.
And then I was watching the movie and I was like, kind of getting real guy vibes from this guy.
Yeah.
And then you leaned over and you went, he's real.
He's a real dude.
And I went, oh, I don't know. Maybe that's not what you said,
yeah.
but it was
it's something along
that.
those
you
lines.
You were like, yeah.
Yeah, I informed you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so speaking of, it won't have a whole lot of bearing on our episode because we want to talk about the movie, but I watched, there's a YouTube channel I really like, called History Buffs, and he just looks at historical movies and compares them to their actual like historical relevancy and accuracy. And he has a really good episode on Lawrence of Arabia, which, just shouting that out if anybody wants to check that out, is very interesting. There were elements of him as a person that are omitted. You know, we start the story much later than, you know, his actual life. And yeah, good episode. Highly recommend checking that out to anybody who is further interested.
One other point before we kind of dive into this is that this does fall into the, what did we called it, guy fall. Is that what we were calling it on our drive back from the theater?
Yeah, guy
this
fall
falls
movies.
into this falls into the guy fall genre.
Yeah, guy fall cinema.
Which Citizen Kane is arguably one of the best guy fall movies, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's about it. Basically, this genre is guys who fall.
Yes.
You know, guys who achieve some sort of power or status and then they fall because of their own hubris or what have you.
Yeah.
Citizen Kane, Lawrence of Arabia. I would even argue that The Greatest Showman falls into this category, Parker. Everyone go check out The Greatest Showman episode. Parker's mad. I would even say things like There Will Be Blood and Tar. Like, even Tar, it doesn't even have to be a real guy.
Yeah.
It could just be like anyone, you know?
Totally.
Anyway, so this is a great guy fall movie as well.
Absolutely.
So if you're looking to watch a man lose his morals and just absolutely get wrecked by hubris, check this out.
Yeah, to the point that in high school, I tried showing this movie to my best friend, Lizzie, and we watched the first half, and then I told her about the second half of just like, oh yeah, now like the second half is, you know, his fall from grace. And she's like, I like him a lot. I don't want to see that happen. So we didn't watch the second half of the movie. She was like, let's just leave it here. It's okay.
Wow.
Which was really funny.
That's wonderful. This is 4 hours long.
It is.
Parker and I did go see it in theaters. The theater going experience was wonderful.
Oh, it was so nice.
It was really nice.
I'm low-key kind of obsessed with intermissions now. I'd never done an intermission in a movie theater before, and it was lovely. It had 15 minutes. There was a counter on the screen. You and I got to check in about the first half of the movie and talk a little bit about what you thought was going to happen next. Got a snack, went to the bathroom. It was so nice.
Yeah, my guess that the Transformers would get involved was completely wrong, but
Hey,
we did get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, we did, and I just had to bite my tongue and just be like, hey, Max, they might show up. You never know. Optimus might be here.
You never know.
You never know.
Everyone go into a movie just assuming there's a small chance. The chance is never zero that the Transformers will show up.
Very true. Very true.
That's a dumb joke. Why did I... This is a good movie. This is like a good piece of historical filmmaking. It's like an important film, and I was just like, Transformers.
Yeah, Transformers. Sure.
So, Parker, did you do a little bit of research?
Oh yeah. Oh, you betcha.
Oh boy.
So, some broad strokes. Lawrence of Arabia is interesting because T.E. Lawrence, again, was a real guy, and like the movie depicts, he died very young in a motorcycle accident. And he already was kind of this mythic figure. And when you die young in an accident like that, like you build even more of a myth. Like conspiracy theories exist that the British government killed him and all these things, right? So about 20 or 30 years after he died, there was a very famous lecturer who would go around. That was the thing people used to do. There would be traveling shows of lectures. You would go around and, go and see somebody do a lecture hall.
That's not, now they just have podcasts.
Now they have podcasts, We could have been lecturers, but here we are.
I think we would have been great lecturers.
Hey, I think it would have been great.
I mean, you're a professor. So.
Yeah, well. And so this guy, he started telling the story of T.E. Lawrence as part of his lecture, and he kind of blew up in popularity a second time, posthumously. He became very famous. And a number of different film adaptations were kind of attempted over the years, and it just kept never happening until finally this one from Columbia kind of coalesced. Sam Spiegel was the producer. He got David Lean involved, who had just come off of Bridge Off the River Kwai, which was kind of his big foray. He made other films before. He made about 10 films before this, including Brief Encounter, which is such a good movie. Good movie. But so they started kind of building out the cast. Originally, like it was fully cast and announced. It was supposed to be Marlon Brando as T.E. Lawrence.
Really?
They had Brando and he backed out. And then they cast a 25-year-old Albert Finney as T.E. Lawrence. And
Albert Finney's great, though.
David Lean didn't like his screen test, so they didn't use him.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Found Peter O'Toole, who had been doing theater in London, had a bit of a name for himself there, but had never done film before. He screen tested, went really well. David Lean really liked him. He got the part. Additionally, I thought it was very interesting learning about the casting process for the character of Ali, which eventually went to Omar Sharif. Originally, there was a German actor cast, then 2 French actors, and none of those worked out. And I'm so glad none of those worked out.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So according to the documentary, the casting director found Omar in a book of Arab actors. And one of the reasons he was called in for an interview was because he could speak English. And it's like, okay, great.
Yeah.
That's nice. He's an Egyptian actor. He's of Egyptian descent. Born and raised around Cairo, as I understand. He went and met with David Lean and Sam Spiegel. They liked him a lot. He ended up getting the part. And interestingly, from getting cast in this, like during that same meeting, he also signed a 7-year contract with Columbia, which was a really big deal for an Egyptian actor.
Yeah,
at the time.
that's huge.
Which kind of bled over into a few years later. Probably, I don't know, I think it's 4 or 5. Let me double check. Yeah, three years later is Dr. Zhivago, which is also David Lean, and Omar Sharif has the title role, like the lead role in that film, which I really need to see. I really need to check out Dr. Zhivago at some point. So kind of just some general stuff, and then I have like specific scene things I'll talk when we go to the summary. But the making of documentary has a lot of Omar, which makes me very happy. And he seemed to have a really good time on this shoot. He was a little bit nervous going in, but apparently he and David Lean ended up getting like a very good rapport. He talks about how like David Lean didn't like actors. He liked working with actors, but whenever like we'd be done for the day, he wouldn't hang out with actors. He thought they talked too much about themselves. He just didn't enjoy their company. He's like, but he did kind of gravitate towards me, and we would hang out a lot, which I thought was just really fun that he and David Lean had such a good friendship. Omar talks about how Lean really loved the idea of like the all black robes, and he's like, and I just said, yeah, sure, whatever you want, David, like that sounds great. And he's like, that was kind of miserable for me out in the desert heat. Yeah. He had 12 versions of that costume because they would just go through them. And he said at the end of every day of filming, the inside of his robes would be white from all of the salt he lost throughout the day.
Wow.
Throughout the whole shoot, he said he lost about 20 pounds.
Sure.
Like just brutal conditions out there. The costumes were made to order in Syria. Like they used actual Arab seamstresses, which I thought was really cool.
Okay.
All of the British uniforms were done by a costumer in London, and there was like a specific cutter who lived in London that they worked with, who actually made uniforms, like remembered the real Allenby and had made his uniforms. And so like all of those are very accurate and made exactly the way they would have been made, which I thought was really cool. Let me see if I can grab her name. I should have written it down. But the costume designer herself, she talked about in the interview how it was really important to nail Lawrence's costumes, obviously. Like she wanted him to be very interesting. Phyllis Dalton is her name. Mm-hmm. And she talked about how they deliberately, all of his British uniforms, they made a size too small. They wanted them to be ill-fitting. They wanted them to, like, he just doesn't fit in his clothing, and he doesn't fit in this world. And then when he gets, the robes later that he's gifted, like, they fit beautifully. They're tailor-made to him. He just is so comfortable in those. And I like little things like that. It's those things that are the subconscious details of filmmaking that, you may not look at that and immediately be like, oh, yeah, that's a small when it should be a medium. But, like, you can feel it, Yeah. And I like that level of detail. Let's see. They had a base camp out in the desert of just a bunch of tents that everybody stayed in. Because, again, you had to go out to location. They were there filming. They had a little bar on site. Omar Sharif talks about how it just felt kind of like camp, like there was a lot of camaraderie going on. And part of that was they used to have, for catering, they had these little white paper cups, kind of styrofoam paper cups. And they would say it was just a nuisance because they'd have them in trash cans and they'd get picked up by the wind, blown out into the desert, and somebody would have to go get it because it's just this white spot in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
And then they would have to cover their tracks that they had made in the sand every time. And they just talked about how miserable that was, of just like,
it sounds miserable.
They'd set up a shot, they'd get all this stuff, and then like a truck would come through and just like tear up the landscape. And they're like, well, we have to move the camera again because we need it to look like, virgin sand. There can't be any footprints or tracks or anything. And they said it was just a total pain in the ass to deal with all of that. But, it kind of, it pays off. The vistas in this are incredible. Let's see, what else? This was interesting. So on their first kind of week of shooting, they're all out on location, and Omar Sharif meets Alec Guinness, and he hadn't met Alec before. And specifically, Guinness asked to meet him. He's like, hey, I'd really like to meet you. Did you have something?
Well, okay, so there's something that we need to address.
Yeah, there is.
Because Parker's been sitting here just gushing about Lawrence of Arabia. But just so that no one, this movie features brownface.
Yeah, a lot
from a number of actors. Obviously.
Yeah.
It was 1962. It's a British American production. It's a miracle. It sounds like it literally was that Omar Sharif was found and cast in the role of Ali.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk about that because you have thoughts about that.
I do.
But Yeah, it's just an unfortunate fact of this film that it was made with that. So,
Yep, so
I don't know. Is there anything else we really need to say other than that that's unfortunate and we hate that part of that movie?
Yeah, hate that part of the movie.
We're not going to excuse it. We're not going to be like, well,
yeah.
No.
Just acknowledge
Terrible.
that it exists, product of its time, sucks. And again, to that point that you made earlier, and we'll talk about it more, like, Omar Sharif absolutely proves they didn't have to do this, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, there are very talented Arab actors out there at the time that they could have cast and they didn't.
Yeah, and as we said, we don't think Alec Guinness is particularly impressive in the role. Not that if he was fantastic, it would make it okay.
No.
But it would at least be like, well, they got him because he's great.
Mm-hmm.
But no.
Yeah.
It's very clear they just got a British actor because they were like, well, that's what you do.
Right.
Okay, so Alec Guinness is on set.
He's on set.
And he asks to meet Omar Sharif.
He asks me Omar. And he's like, and we talked for like 5 hours. Like, we just sat and just chatted. He just kept wanting to talk to me and all this stuff. And apparently they had a pretty good rapport as well, which I was glad to hear. But they go to see, like, the next day is Alec's first scene. And so Peter and Omar go to watch it. And they're watching it. And Peter leans over to Omar. He's like, he's doing you. He's like, he took your accent as somebody, he's like, as a, you know, an Arab speaker who learned English. He's like, he's taking your inflections. He's like, oh, you're right. He's like, so those 5 hours, he's like, I don't think he was just doing that to, like, you know, he's like, I think he genuinely cared to know about me. He's like, but yeah, he was doing a character study on me for 5 hours to get that down.
That's wild.
It's nuts. And
that's nuts.
He seemed very flattered by it when he talked about it. And I was like, all right, Omar, if you're chill with it, then that's fine.
Alec Guinness is like, no, I have a friend who told me it was okay. What? No, Alec, that's not okay.
That's not how this works.
David Lean didn't even ask me to do this.
What? Let's see, what else? Lean really liked, so they would always do, he was the kind of director who, he knew what he wanted in mind, but he never storyboarded and he never, like, shot listed. He would come on set and be like, okay, this is the location we're working with. And he'd work with the actors and figure it out. And they would do a day of rehearsals and then they would film it the next day after they'd kind of figured the whole thing out. And part of that is that Lean always liked to watch rehearsals directly through the viewfinder and not, like, talking with the actors, because his reasoning was that he really likes it kind of focused them in. He's like, I could see the frame around them. I know exactly what's showing up and how they're showing up on camera, and I can adjust accordingly, which I just thought is an interesting directing style. The DP, Freddie Young, handpicked all of the equipment from the Panavision lab himself. Like, he was very meticulous. Like, I want these lenses, I want these cameras. And part of that was, it was very challenging to film out in the desert like this. As they would go, consistently, when they would play the dailies back, there would be these blotches on the film, and they couldn't figure out what was causing it. Like, is it sand in the lens? Like, what's going on? Eventually, they realized it was just that the negative itself was getting so hot that it would burn as it went through the reel. And so to counteract this, they put a canopy over the camera, draped a wet cloth over the top, and an ice cube, and basically made, like, a refrigerator unit for the cameras.
They just needed to take care of their little guy.
So their little guy was getting too hot. You know, he's getting overheated.
He was just overworked. He's overheated.
Yeah, he just needed some time. Yeah, so let's see.
That's wild.
Right? Like, that's crazy. That just the things they had to do to make this work. Let's see. Those are all specific scenes. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit beforehand, and you had questions. So there's several different cuts of this film that exist. And what happened was, the original print in 1962 is 222 minutes. That was what they wanted. That was the film as it existed. Immediately, what happened was that Columbia said, hey, this is too long for a lot of cinemas. Like, a lot of cinema managers are asking for a shorter cut so they can fit more screenings in and make more money. So they cut 20 minutes out. And David Lean was involved with all of these as they went along. So they cut 20 minutes out, kind of the year after it came out. That version was shown in cinemas in 1963. In 1970, David Lean was ordered to cut another 15 minutes for TV airings. And he asked them, the promise was, he's like, I'll do that you have to promise me this version never shows up in a cinema. And they said, yeah, sure, whatever, David. Like, we'll totally do that. Didn't happen. That version plays for a while, and that version is 187 minutes. And that became the version for about a decade that got tossed around. So in 1989, there was an effort from Columbia, as well as backed by Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese, saying, hey, let's restore the whole thing. Let's put it all back the way that it was. And they got pretty close. They got that restoration, which is the version that is around today, is 218 minutes. So there's 4 minutes of lost footage that they couldn't salvage.
Whoa.
That isn't there anymore.
Wow.
And from what I could find, it's hard to find reports on exactly what those 4 minutes were, especially because the cuts that existed are kind of within scenes. So like you and I talked about, there's a scene after intermission where Prince Faisal is talking to Jackson Bentley, the reporter. And we were in the theaters and we noticed a moment where the audio for Alec Guinness sounded different. And I was like, oh, that's one of the cut scenes, which I also found out I had told you falsely in the theater that they got somebody to do that. Alec Guinness is still around. It is Alec Guinness, but the audio technician talking about it, he said that all of their voices, because like Peter O'Toole and Alec Guinness both came back to do this in 1989. He said both of their voices has mellowed, so we had to change the harmonics by using computers. They had to adjust it slightly to try and sound like they sounded 25 years ago, you know?
Gotcha, yeah.
And his is a lot more obvious than O'Toole's is.
Yeah.
O'Toole does a pretty good job.
Yeah, I never really, from memory, I didn't really notice that with Toole as Lawrence as much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so what happened is
that's interesting.
They do all this stuff and they contact the original editor, and her name, I had it written down, Ann Coates, which is, I just want to shout out yet another fantastic female editor behind some of the greatest films of all time. You know, like Ann Coates, Thelma Schumacher, Marcia Lucas, like
there's a ton. I mean, there are countless.
Yeah.
Always look for the name of an editor on an old film.
Absolutely.
And I would say a good chunk of the time, it's a woman behind the scenes saving movies, making movies good.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you. What was her name? It was Coates.
Yeah,
what was her first name?
Ann Coates.
Ann Coates. Shout out to Ann Coates.
Shout out to Ann Coates. And I thought this was just a very cute story. She was talking about it in the documentary. She was like, yeah, so, you know, Columbia contacts me, says, hey, we want to do this. We want you to be involved as the original editor. And she's like, good luck. Like, I'd be shocked if you could find the negatives. Like, that stuff's just gone. We cut it out and it disappeared. And through private collections and reels at, movie theaters, they found the negatives. And I thought this was very cute that when she found out that news, her very first reaction was she's like, we have to put the goggles shot back in of the goggles on the bush. That was cut out. That wasn't there for like 15 years. And so she's like, that was her first reaction. And then she called up David Lean and she said, hey, have you heard about this thing? And he's like, yeah, I heard about it. We've got to put the goggles back. Like that was his first reaction as well, which I just thought was very cute.
I love that, like, because again, that's like someone who shot it or, was the director of that scene. And then someone who later saw it and edited it in. That's a shot that both of them loved. Yeah. Like that's very cute.
It's very cute.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that part.
So that's kind of broad strokes research. Last final notes, it had a budget of $15 million. It made $70 million in its initial run, which is really good for 62. Let's see. It, like we talked about, it won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Art Direction Color, Best Cinematography Color, Best Film Editing, Best Music Score, Substantially Original, which I'm curious to know about that distinction, and Best Sound. It was nominated for Best Screenplay based on material from another medium, and Best Actor for Peter O'Toole, and Best Supporting Actor for Omar Sharif.
I love that Omar Sharif got a nomination.
That makes me so happy.
That's wonderful.
That makes me really, really happy.
This, I know that, like, I don't want to detract from how good Peter O'Toole is in this movie, because he's great, especially as his first film role.
Absolutely.
Like, I was not expecting the introducing credit for him.
Yeah.
And it's like introducing Peter O'Toole, and I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, sure.
That's awesome. I know that he was like a theater actor, so obviously this isn't like his first role, but like, that's wild.
Hell of a film debut.
So yeah, I don't want to take anything away from him, but I will say that this is kind of Omar Sharif's movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's both. I'd say it's equally theirs. And I want to talk about my reading of this film.
Yes.
Which we'll also talk about. But yeah, love that he got a nom. Love that Peter O'Toole got a nom too. But more so Omar Sharif.
He did win the Golden Globe. Omar Sharif did, which makes me very happy. Yeah, because at the Golden Globes it got best motion picture, supporting actor for Omar Sharif, best director, and they both won for promising newcomer male. Peter O'Toole and Omar Sharif both won.
They both won. That's cute.
It's cute. It's fun.
Good for them.
Yeah.
I hope they're friends.
I hope it's from all accounts they seem to be very good friends.
That's good.
Yeah, so that's kind of broad strokes. I've got individual things that I'll kind of chime in with from scenes as we go, but I think that cues us up for some summary.
Wonderful. So summaries are interesting on this podcast because if you haven't seen it and you're hearing the entire movie, that's great. Fine. Sure. You do you. But I do recommend that you see this movie. It's really good. I mean, schedule an entire day.
Yeah.
I would say seeing it on a Sunday matinee, like a Sunday starting at 1 is like the perfect time to start.
It's a Sunday afternoon movie for sure.
You've eaten lunch, you start the movie, it ends when it's time to make dinner, you're set. I love that I'm pitching this like I'm on like a morning show. I'm like, the best thing about Lawrence of Arabia is that you can just pop it on 1 p.m. on a Sunday. But it was great. Okay. So for those not in the know, T.E. Lawrence, this movie opens with T.E. Lawrence dying in a motorcycle accident in 1935. Yeah. After his funeral service, a journalist approaches attendees to learn more about the man. Very Kane in that way. Immediately I clocked, and we talked about it at the intermission, but immediately I clocked. I was like, okay, 2 Guy Fawkes movies. They both open with a journalist being like, tell me about the guy.
And nobody knows who he is, really.
And nobody knows who he is, really. Yeah. And the difference being that in this case, this framing device basically leaves us. Right? Like, we don't come back.
We don't come back to this.
It's like an opening scene. Yeah. But he runs into Jackson Bentley, a Chicago reporter that we'll get to know a little later. And Bentley says he was a poet, a scholar, and a mighty warrior. And then when the reporter goes away, he turns to his someone that he's attending the funeral with and kind of disparages Lawrence as the most shameless exhibitionist since Barnum and Bailey. Yeah. Another, what are all these Guy Fawkes movie connect?
I don't like this.
The 3 greatest Guy Fawkes movies we've covered on the podcast. Anyway, this is our framing device as Murray, one of the old servicemen that served with Lawrence, says Lawrence once held a minor role under him in Cairo. Flashback, except it's the whole movie. The rest of the movie is just this. It's World War I. Britain is fighting against the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. This was unclear to me as someone who was unfamiliar with the kind of World War I is not something that America talks about as in detail as we do about the war that we won.
Totally.
Or the war that we won, even though we lost one of them and the other one, whatever. We just don't we don't learn too much about World War I, do we?
Not really.
Anyway, so did you have something you were going to say about?
To your point, I thought this was interesting. I didn't write it down because I thought that I could find it easily enough online, and I couldn't. I have like the 4K set for Lawrence of Arabia, the Steelbook, and the Blu-ray has all of the bonus features, but then the 4K has a single bonus feature, which is just a transcript of. Originally, the movie opened with a Star Wars style prologue of like a block of text that would have given you all of that information that you needed. And I just thought that was really funny because you mentioned that in the theater too. Like, oh, this is World War I. And then I found that I'm like, yeah, they did that in test screenings, and then David Lean didn't think he needed it, so he took it out.
Hey, and he's right for that because honestly, you don't.
No.
It's just like, it's you get an idea of it. If you approach this more like, oh, this is like a fantasy epic, it's not like you need all of the information. The world building is there, except it's the World War I building. This has that great final transition of Lawrence putting out a match with So earlier in the film, this is important to his character. He's in a room with some guys and he puts out a match with his fingers and the guy's like, that damn well hurts, it does, or whatever. British guys, Right. And Lawrence is like, yes, it hurts. And he's like, well, how do you do it? And he's like, well, you have to mind it not hurting.
Yeah, he's like, what's the trick? And he's like, the trick is you don't mind that it hurts.
You just don't mind that it hurts. And he says, what does he say? Mad he is, or something
Barmy,
like that.
Something like that.
Barmy. He says barmy.
Some British.
Thank you, Parker. Yeah. I don't want to erase that wonderful piece of British slang.
No, of course not.
unless it's a slur, in which case, erase it.
Cut it.
I'm not sure. So we kind of go to this scene where Dryden, who is kind of a higher, he's more of a politician figure. He's got a vested interest for the British government in the Middle East. He convinces General Murray to let Lawrence go scope things out with Prince Faisal, and get a sense of how Prince Faisal's revolt against the Turks, who are part of the Ottoman Empire. It's the Ottoman Empire and the Germans were apparently working together, which I was unaware of. So he's just kind of like, hey, go get a sense of like how this is going. What's Faisal's plan? What's he up to?
So this was something from that History Buffs video that like I wish that they maybe mentioned just once, because I've always found this a bit confusing. The reason he goes is because he has previous experience. He can speak and write Arabic fluently. He worked as an archaeologist before this, and then also while the Turks were building the railroad with Germany that kind of cut across Arabia, the British government enlisted him to be a spy because they're like, oh, you're there as an archaeologist, but you can tell us what's going on with the railroad. And so he had done that before this. And that's why they're like, hey, you have experience in the area somewhat. He'd been there for, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something like that. And he could speak and write Arabic.
They allude to it because they're like, oh, he's a book guy.
Yeah.
Like Murray's going through his things and he says like fluent in Arab or something like that. Yeah. Like they allude to the language thing, but I would never have guessed that he like knew about the railroads before this.
Yeah. Which I just thought was interesting.
Yeah. Man, Spielberg really just went, that guy, please. Didn't he?
He did.
When he had made Indiana Jones.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so Lawrence and his guide set out across the desert. They have some interactions. This is also our first great look at the desert. We get that iconic transition of Lawrence blowing out the match, goes into the sun rising on the desert. And, like, I'd seen that before, you know? But, again, in the context of the film itself and also on the big screen. Because this is, like, the 4K restoration of it. It looks amazing,
It looks
Parker.
so good. Oh, my God, it looks so good. And that horizon shot... And there's several others later on in the film, too, of, like, people walking as the sun is rising. All of those shots, and this is another Kane connection, as it were, they dug giant holes in the sand and got the camera down a couple inches above the sand, too, because they wanted the horizon, like, right there. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
It's amazing. As I've reflected on the movie, I keep thinking, like, yeah, no other movies look like this.
No.
Like, it's kind of a bummer.
It is,
you know?
yeah.
Like,
and we'll talk about
this
that.
This is so unique in how kind of magnificent it is to look at.
Totally.
Yeah. So Lawrence's guide is killed upon the arrival of Sharif Ali bin el-Karish because he and Lawrence were drinking from Ali's well. And Ali's like, well, this guy's part of a tribe that I don't get along with. So he knows that he can't drink out of the well, but you're good. You're fine. Yeah. And then he's like, what are you doing here? And Lawrence is like, well, I'm trying to find Prince Faisal. And Sharif Ali is like, I can take you. And he goes, I don't want your company.
Yeah.
It's like, you just killed my guy.
You're a mean dude.
You just killed this guy. You're a mean dude. He basically says, you're a mean dude. Yeah. And Sharif Ali goes, all right. And he heads off. The shot of Ali entering, Parker. I know that we both learned about how this was done. Yeah. There's kind of this shot of the horizon. There's heat waves coming up. Distorting the image of something in the distance approaching. As I saw it for the first time, I was like, is that a person in a robe walking? Is it a person on a horse? And then I was like, no, it's like, this is a hill and that's like a flag at the top of a pole. Like there's going to be this reveal of like a group come over the hill. Yeah. No, it was just so like hard to tell exactly what I was looking at. And it created tension just from me not being able to tell what it was. And it absolutely puts you in the mindset of Lawrence in that moment because his guide is just like, ugh. Yeah. And then, so do you want to talk about how they kind of did that?
So basically there's so many things going on in this. First and foremost, the art director painted white lines in the sand leading to the horizon line. Because like, okay, we want the eye to immediately go to that little black spot when it shows up. And so if you look in that wide shot, there are white lines that like are essentially supposed to be camel tracks, but there's 3 of them and they're all moving directly to that point in the horizon, probably a good 1.5 miles away, right?
Right.
So they do that. They have 2 trucks, 2 Jeeps out where Omar Sharif is. churning up the desert to make a little sandstorm for him to pop out of, so you don't see him until they want you to see him. He pops out, and I thought this was crazy. The original negative of that shot holds the entire time and moves into a close-up when he gets there. So like that wide shot where you see Lawrence, the guide, and then Omar on, Ali out on the horizon, that held the whole time. He came all the way up, and then when he arrives, the camera pushed into a close-up. And it's all there, but they cut it up because David Lean said, quote, "I lost my nerve." He's like, he's like, I wanted to do it. He's like, but I thought audiences wouldn't go for, a 10-minute shot just holding that entire time.
On one hand, he's absolutely right, but on the other, I want to say.
Right, I'm like, the negative exists somewhere where it's all there.
It's crucial that we find it.
Yeah, we got to find that.
It belongs in a museum.
It belongs in a museum.
Saying that about film negatives.
I also thought this was very cute, and one of the ways that like Omar Sharif endeared himself to David Lean. So that scene, he comes and he starts, while he's talking to Lawrence, he gets water out of the well and he scoops it into a little cup for himself. And Omar was really nervous about this. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I have like a gun on my back. Like, I don't know what to do. So that the evening before they shot, he got the prop master. He's like, can you come with me to the well, bring a couple lights, bring the water thing, my gun, and like the little tin cup. And I just want to practice this. And he spent like 2 hours practicing this movement to get it right. And he realized he couldn't do it because every time he leaned down, the gun would fall off his shoulder. So he sewed the strap into his costume the next morning so it stayed put. They filmed the scene. It goes off without a hitch. And the prop master comes up to David and he's like, do you know what he's been up to all night? And he's like, no, what was he doing? He's like, he came out here. He's been practicing that all night long. And like that, just David Lean took a shine to him after that. He's like, I'm glad that you're like conscientious and wanting to put in the work. That's really cool.
Wow. Lovely.
Yep.
It's just an incredible shot.
It's such a good shot.
And it sounds like so much, again, this is another movie where you look at it and you just think about all the work that had to go into every single shot in it.
Totally.
And like you brought this up, we talk about it mostly with like stop motion. Of like stop motion gives Parker a headache because if he thinks about it too much, he's like, why would you do this?
Why would you do this to yourself? Yeah.
And you leaned over at one point when there's like a shot of like the Prince Faisal's camp.
Yeah.
And all the tents, and you're like, they had to do all of that. Like all of that's in camera. They had to like build tents way out there.
Yeah, just everything you see in the movie is real. They had to go to the desert. They had to get, 500 extras and
they
do
had to
this.
Cover tracks when someone ran out to clean up cups.
Yep.
Yeah, it's unreal.
It's staggering.
Yeah, so Lawrence kind of heads out on his own. He meets up with Colonel Brighton on his way in a funny little echo scene. He's singing a song in a canyon. And then Colonel Brighton kind of lets him know that he's there in the canyon and heard him. Colonel Brighton's British, in case you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
But Parker, you mentioned like that shot of him from a distance. Like it's so big you can't even see. And then like Brighton steps out.
Yeah, and he's just tiny.
For Lawrence to see him, and it's just so far away. The scale of this is wild. Yeah. The two men kind of head to Prince Faisal, and they advise him. Brighton wants him to pull out of somewhere. I can't remember where, but he's like, you need to retreat.
Yenbo, I think it says.
Yeah, and but Lawrence is like, no, you shouldn't do that. Yeah. And Brighton's like, dude,
you're a traitor. Shut up.
You're a traitor. Shut up. And then the prince just becomes very interested in what Lawrence has to say based off of this. But something else I love about this scene of this kind of consulting with Faisal is Ali entering. And you pointed out, like, Ali kind of repeats what Lawrence has said before. Because Lawrence, when Ali runs away, he's like, because, Arabs are barbaric and you're terrible. You know, he says a bunch of kind of racist things to him. And Ali just completely repeats it to Faisal and is like just throwing it in Lawrence's face. And Lawrence is like, embarrassed.
He's embarrassed.
But what I really love about this scene is when Lawrence turns around to see him. Because Parker, I'll just kind of unveil my thesis here. Yeah. I think this is a love story about Lawrence and Ali. And that's not because Lawrence was gay.
Sure.
I just think that the way the movie is structured almost like a rom-com, like a When Harry Met Sally. Yeah. In that they have this meet cute of sorts in which Ali kills his guide and is like, do you want me to guide you to Faisal? I can help you. And he's like, no, I don't want you. You're mean. And then later when they bump into each other again, they're kind of like, oh, hey, like this is kind of awkward. Yeah. And they're kind of tense. It's like enemies.
It's a real enemies to lovers.
It's a real enemies to lovers situation. But I just love these funny little beats of their relationship.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was interesting about that tent sequence, again, like things that surprised me for a production in 1962. I don't know who was like pounding the hammer on this. I don't know if it was Lean. I don't know if it was the script supervisor, whoever. Somebody on set was like adamant during that scene because like they're in this council and there's sort of like a spiritual guru there for Faisal who's reading from the Quran. And somebody on staff, it was unclear, again, in the documentary who was like in charge of this, but it was like, they're like, when you're quoting the Quran, it needs to be word for word. Like you cannot paraphrase, you can't mess up your line. We're going to do this until you get it word for word from the Quran because that is important. And I was surprised about that from a film that has brown face, you know?
Yeah. I'm glad that their respect of this culture extended to religious respect and then actually didn't want the people around.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's cool of the British.
But yeah, good scene.
Yeah.
I like it. I mean, Lawrence quotes the Quran to Prince Faisal, which also kind of gets him to be like...
I was like, oh, hey.
I like him being like, oh, I've read the Quran. I don't think he has. I don't think he has.
I don't think you have, Alec.
You're Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
Anyway. So Lawrence kind of has this amazing walk in the dunes at night, which I think prompted me to just throw my hand up in disbelief. And Parker was like, yeah. Because it's just like the wind carrying the sand ever so perfectly, him walking, like it's all just, it's amazing. It's truly amazing. And if you ever get the chance to see this in theaters, I can't recommend it enough. Especially if they have an intermission, because the intermission's nice. But after that walk in the dunes, and there's two boys that kind of met Lawrence as he entered camp, and they're just kind of two young boys, and they're kind of following him and just kind of watching him think. Lawrence determines that Faisal's best course of action is a surprise attack on Aqaba, which would support the British in the war. Faisal gives him 50 men, including Sharif Ali, to do so, and those two teen boys indebt themselves to Lawrence as servants. Ali is like, we can't make it. We can't make it to Aqaba. We have to cross the Nefud Desert. That's an impossible task. The camels will only survive so long without water. Like 20 days or something like that. And it looks miserable. This is a very effective sequence in the movie. Is him and these 50 men just crossing the desert. It's really well paced. Like I think it's a well paced. Again, you talked about this as well, but like the runtime of this movie allows them to explore so many beats. To an extent that feels really nice. I was thinking about, like, it's interesting to bring that up because I've been thinking about this in the week since we watched this movie. That like, I'm now of the opinion that a solid 50% of like the limited series television events we get could just be 4-hour movies, you know? Like there's a lot of them out there that I'm like, okay, you don't need 16 hours to tell this story, but you don't need 2. I understand why you're doing this. Maybe do Lords of Arabia. Just do 4, you know? Yeah, I also think that, I mean, this is something that a lot of, like, having been to film school, I feel like there are a lot of kind of students in our kind of age range who are like, any movie that's over 3 hours is pretentious and bad. Yeah. And they don't give Scorsese a chance. Like they're like poisoned against long movies. And I see where they're coming from. Sure. But also I think that a long movie doesn't feel long if it's paced correctly. No. And feel long in a bad way, I should say. Because obviously watching this, I know that it's a long movie. Sure. Like I can tell that it's taking a long time. But I never feel it. And I really think that that's the main problem that people run into is if they watch a 3-hour movie that's not paced correctly, then you really start to feel it. And you're checking the watch and you're like, when is this going to be over? Or even like a 2-hour. I've seen like 2-hour movies that I would have guessed were like closer to 2:30 just because they're paced poorly. But this is just so, I don't know, this just feels right. Yeah. This feels like this is what they needed to do it. And yeah. Strong argument for long movies. Absolutely. I agree. Can't wait until Max remakes Lawrence of Arabia as a 6-part limited series. I shouldn't manifest that. Yeah, please don't curse us. I'm with sorry. That. I shouldn't will that into existence. Sorry. They make it though. They do. They make it across the desert, but not before Lawrence heads back into the desert to save one of their men, Gassim, who fell off his camel. And there's the shot cracked me up. It's a good shot, obviously, but Gassim just walking through the desert,
Yeah.
like at just normal pace with determination of like, I'm
I'll
gonna
catch 'em.
catch up with them.
Yep.
It's really funny. Parker leaned over to me and said, me waking up at 2 a.m. to get water.
Yeah.
And it's like simultaneously the least sensical meme out of that shot, but also the funniest one. And I just wanted to give you a shout out because
I appreciate
Parker came up with a really good joke there, guys. And where's the Lawrence of Arabia meme page? I need to follow. I need to see those TikToks.
Gotta find those TikToks. With that scene, I want to bring it up, like coming back to your whole thesis of the film. I really like the conversation with Ali when Lawrence decides to go back because he's really upset about it. He's like, "You're gonna kill yourself." And what did you like? What did you bring us here for? Yeah, like you're not gonna be there. What you brought us here for nothing? And he's like, I'll be there.
And Lawrence says, I'll be there. Mm-hmm. I'll be in Aqaba.
Yeah, because what happens is
Peter
that
O'Toole's so good at
everybody, when they notice that Gassim is gone, everybody else in the caravan is like, that's the way it goes. And they're like, no, Lawrence. And somebody says, Lawrence, there's nothing we can do. It was written. Like, it was written that he was going to.
Yeah, it was written that he was going to die. Mm-hmm. And Lawrence says, nothing is written.
Yeah.
And he heads off into the desert. And I really like that sequence of him saving Gassim, coming back. Like, I think it's edited really well. Mm-hmm. All of the tension works of like we see Gassim watching the sun rise and the tent, like it's really well structured and well edited.
It is.
Shout out to Ann Coates, I'm sure.
Absolutely. The wide shot where Dowd sees him and runs up to him and his camel just barrels past him. He was supposed to stop and he couldn't get his camel to stop, so he just goes past and loops back.
He got it to turn. Yeah. I thought that worked.
I like it.
Totally made sense, especially for the character.
I like it a lot.
Yeah. But he comes back and Ali is literally like,
"You son
It's like
of
in
a
Predator.
bitch."
It's like, "You son of a bitch." It's like that. Yeah. Though if they had kissed, I would have completely, like if they had done like the Portrait of a Lady on Fire, like head hold or something, I would have been like, makes sense. Makes sense, you guys. Just saying. Anyway, I love that because it's, and then Lawrence says, nothing is written.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's true, Lawrence.
We'll see.
I hope nothing bad happens. Out of the desert, they give Lawrence some white robes. They feel he's earned them, so he gets some white robes. They played a little scene before the movie started, a little like documentary clip of Peter O'Toole talking about that, and I liked that knowledge of that scene.
Yeah,
he gets the white robes and he kind of goes off on his own behind a dune. And David Lean had told him like, "There's your stage, Peter." I don't know if that was Alec Guinness. Is everyone Alec Guinness in this movie?
Sure.
But Peter O'Toole he does a little bit of like miming. He's kind of like, he's playing.
He's peacocking.
He's peacocking. But he had the idea of like pulling out the knife and looking at himself. And again, I just love these moments in movies where it's like on the day, an actor does something or someone comes up with something and they go, "That's really good," and then it becomes like an iconic part of the movie. Mm-hmm. In this, it's him looking at himself in the knife, and then later looking at himself in the knife after he's covered in blood.
Yeah.
And he's unrecognizable. It's really good.
It's really good.
But he kind of goes off and does that. And while he's doing that, kind of our next kind of big key player here, Auda Abu-Tayi?
Auda Abu-Tayi.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to let you say it.
You just call him
he's
Auda.
a local tribe leader. Auda, yeah. He's a local tribe leader. And his son is there. He's his backup. There's a funny little joke there.
Yep.
This movie's funny.
This movie is funny.
Which, going into this, I was not expecting. I thought it was going to be dry as a saltine cracker. I thought I was going to be like, but like a beauty, like a prestige saltine.
Yeah.
Of like, this looks beautiful, but man, is this dry.
It's dry.
I could use some water.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny.
It's got jokes.
And Peter O'Toole's funny in it. Like he's playing Lawrence as this really interesting kind of like, he's got kind of a foppish quality to him at first, and then that slowly evolves into kind of a I don't know, like a confidence. It's very interesting.
Totally.
But yeah, there's like a funny little joke with his son, and anyway, there's a brief confrontation because they're drinking out as well, and then they kind of go back to Auda's camp, and Lawrence is like, the Turks may be giving you money, but you're not really you're their servant, basically. You're doing what they're asking you to, and he's like, hey, are these wages servants' wages?
Yeah.
Basically, he's like, you're getting paid minimum wage, dude.
Yeah.
And you could just rob the place.
All the money's there. There's a big giant box of gold. Go get it.
Yeah. And Auda's like, all right. And he's like, but most of all, you wouldn't do it for money.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do it for this. You do it for, what does he say?
Your pleasure.
your pleasure. And he's like,
yeah, for my
you
pleasure.
son of a bitch.
You got me.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, like to your point of like the 4-hour runtime, I just like seeing these scenes of watching why, like, because it's so much of the outside perspective, and like what I was trying to buffer you against after, because I haven't watched this movie in probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
And like even my perception of it had been skewed of like, it is just kind of the white savior movie, and I have to kind of prep people for that. But it's a really good movie. It's very well technically made. But like, I like that the movie takes its time to show it's like, no, this is why the Arab people liked him. Like, he's personable. He's very intelligent. He's very good with his words. Like, at a certain point, Auda even makes a mention of that. He's like, thy mother mated with a scorpion. He's like, you're just very clever. You're very, okay, you know how to manipulate and you know how to be convincing.
Even at the end of this scene, he says it.
Yeah.
When he's like, you did it for your pleasure. And then he says, your mother mated with a scorpion. Like, and that's a great point because this is the white savior movie.
Yeah.
And I think it will always be perceived as such. But it also has a lot more to say about that because it's more interested in Lawrence as a character than just saying he's a white man who saved Arabia.
Totally.
It's not that.
You had such an interesting observation when we got to intermission because I turned to you and I said, what do you think of the movie? And you said, I really like it so far. My feeling on it will depend on how David Lean lands on Lawrence.
Yeah.
Like what his opinion of Lawrence as a character is and as a person is. Of like,
yes.
If it is just jingoism, British imperialism isn't that great. Yeah, probably not a great movie.
Right.
And I just thought that was so interesting that was what you leaned into. It was
well,
like,
and
okay,
also,
it depends.
A big part of that is how the first half ends, which I'm really excited to talk about.
Yeah.
But basically, right before they go to take Aqaba, a man is I loved this in the theater experience. A man is accused of doing something to. He's from the 50 men from Faisal.
Yeah, he killed one of Auda's men.
He killed one of Auda's men because of a disagreement or something.
Yeah. It's been a long blood feud between these people.
Yes, and Lawrence basically is like, okay, Auda, if he's like, so he asks Ali, he's like, Ali, if they were to do anything to a man from your tribe, would you fight them? And he's like, yeah, we'd kill them.
Yeah.
And he's like, Auda, would you fight back? Yes. Okay. Then I have to execute this man.
I am the neutral party.
I'm the neutral party. If I kill him, you guys don't have to fight.
You guys get justice. Nobody is offended. We move on.
Yes, we move on. And then the man is Gassim, the man that Lawrence saved from the desert. And it wasn't just me.
No.
Other people in the audience
just
went like when Gassim's head comes up and Lawrence goes, Gassim? And like everyone, and he's like, did you do it? And Gassim is like,
Yeah.
And then he shoots him. He kills him. And Ali is like, Lawrence, everything is written. See? He was supposed to die or something. Or like he kind of says that to Lawrence. But then he says it to Auda, which I thought was really interesting. Auda's like, what's wrong with him? And Ali is like, he's the man that Lawrence risked his life to save in the desert. And Auda goes, so it was written. So he was going to die anyway.
Yeah, and Ali's like really sensitive about it with Lawrence. He's like, hey, Lawrence, he's like, the writing is still yours. You saved the life, you took the life.
You gave life, you took life.
Yeah.
Ali, that's like, you can't just feed your boyfriend's ego like that.
Please, you can't be doing this.
You can't tell him things like that. They're not boyfriends. They're good friends.
They're good friends. You can have male friendship that isn't sexual, but also it's a little fruity.
This is a rom-com, basically. And it's not a comedy. It's a rom-drom.
A rom-drom.
I'm sure that's a term.
I'm sure.
Anyway, so then they go take Aqaba.
Yeah.
And it's a great sequence. You just have this really long, wide pan across as the horses and camels run in.
So
yeah, Parker, you're rubbing your temples. You look like you're in pain.
Oh God. So
tell me about this.
So Omar Sharif talks about this scene, and he's like, "We're up at the head with 2,000 extras on horses behind us." And he said, "I'm really nervous about this." And he's like, "I tied myself to my camel because I did not want to fall off." He's like, "And on one of the takes, Peter fell off his camel and 200 riders on horseback came over the top of him." He's like, "And me and everybody else thought, oh, Peter's dead. Peter just got trampled to death. He's gone." He's like, "And the dust clears And Peter's camel had planted itself 4 feet all the way around him and stood over him. And everybody went around the camel. And he was fine. Just
shout out to that camel, man.
Shout out to the camel.
Yeah, that's
crazy.
Wild.
It's nuts.
It's nuts. I hope they gave the camel like extra pay or something.
They really, yeah. You know? He needed overtime for that. But it's an incredible shot of them just rushing Aqaba and killing people. And I love the shot too, because the whole point of Lawrence's scheme is that everybody's like, we can't take Aqaba. They're giant, like 12-inch guns. It'll destroy us. And he's like, the guns can't be turned around. They're
pointed to the ocean. Yeah.
And so the shot starts with the cavalry coming in. It goes all over the whole city, pans across, and it lands on the gun facing out towards the ocean. And it's
wonderful. And then a really great fade. There's a lot of great crossfades in this movie, and I love that editing choice.
That fade in that scene doesn't exist in the theatrical cut. They cut it out. Like that whole scene on the beach is like 30 seconds. Ugh. And it bums me out. It fades
to this really gorgeous beach shot where Lawrence is kind of sitting on a camel on the beach, and he's just,
poignant.
Pensive. So I've written here in the summary, Lawrence and the boys, which is to say the 2 young teens who had indebted themselves to him, but it does sound like I'm just saying him and the gang.
Lawrence
and the boys. What are the kids' names?
Dowd and Farouche.
Yeah,
Dowd and Farouche. Mm-hmm.
They head over Sinai to let the British know.
Because Aud gets really upset and he breaks the telegram.
Yeah.
Because he's like, there's no golden box. It's all just paper money. What is this?
Yeah. And then Lawrence is like, well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So we have to go tell everybody this happened now. We can't just call them.
Yeah. And before he alludes to it, I was like, very religious. He's going over Sinai to tell something to people. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've written here, one of the boys dies a la Never-Ending Story.
Yeah.
Just sinks in a quicksand thing. And it's harrowing.
Yeah. You passed my favorite joke in the movie, though.
I'm sorry. I was about to mention it, and then I skipped it because I didn't write it down.
I like the joke, which is that he tells Aud, he's like, I'm going to cross Sinai, and then I'm going to go tell everybody in Cairo what happened here. And first Ali kind of gets upset because he says, he's like, they won't believe an Arab if they just show up and tell them we've taken Aqaba. And Ali's really instead, he's like, oh, okay, yeah. He's like, you're going to go to Cairo. You're going to take off these funny clothes. You're going to
put pants on.
Yeah, you're going to put pants on, and you're going to tell them about our barbarity or whatever. And Lawrence just says, you're a very foolish man, and walks away. Tells Aud he's going to leave. And he's like, you can't cross the mountain, especially with the boys. And he's like, why not? Moses did. And he rides off. He's like, you're taking the children? And Lawrence just shouts back, Moses did.
Yeah, it's good.
Good.
I can see why Lizzie was like, let's end it here.
Especially because she was real sad about Dowd. She was very sad about Dowd.
See, I mean, he was my favorite of the boys. I was mad that the other one survived because he was annoying to me.
Yeah.
But I mostly was like, these boys can go. Yep. I don't know.
Another wild story of just the making of this movie and how they achieved it. The quicksand is they dug a hole, they built a box, and at the top of the box they had like an iris, like a camera iris made out of rubber. So it was thicker at the edges and thinner in the middle. And the special effects guy got in the box, they buried him under the sand. He held onto this kid's feet and slowly pulled him down into the box with him. And then they dug him out.
Wow, I had not even considered how they did that. I was just like, this guy died for real.
That guy's dead. That's crazy.
Oh man, I do love that this movie has quicksand in it because that's not real.
Yeah,
quicksand isn't real in the way that we think of it.
No,
but I loved it. I loved that later even Lawrence is like, he died in quicksand, and everyone kind of goes, oh, and I was like, oh,
yeah,
that's funny. Also, it leads into the eeriest scene in the film. Mm-hmm. It feels very spooky.
Very much so.
Lawrence and Dowd, or Farage, or whatever one's alive, they arrive at like an old British outpost.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to find the canal so they can follow it to Cairo, basically, the Suez Canal. They arrive at this spooky outpost, and I was really like, I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like, I think the other kid might die. Like, I thought there would be like people hiding there, like they'd overtaken this outpost.
Yeah, because it looks like it's been bombed out, you know.
Yeah, it looks like it's prime ambush material, totally. You know. But the kid runs through, comes back, and Lawrence is just despondent. He's just gazing off, and there's eerie music playing.
Looks like a ghost. He's just
looks
covered
like a
in
ghost.
dust.
He's great.
Yeah.
Peter O'Toole's great, and they covered him in dust. They made him look real miserable.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just what he looked like at the time. I don't know. But they go through the house because the kid's like, no, you got to come see this. And they go through, they go to the other side. And you love this shot.
I love the shot.
Talk about the shot, Parker.
There's a sand dune that takes up most of the frame, and you hear the horn of a ship, and you just see the giant, like the top of a giant like ocean
Yeah, like
liner.
the smokestacks, yeah.
Yeah, the smokestacks going over the top of the dunes. And I love that imagery. Is just so cool.
Yeah. They go over the dune. The canal is there. They can follow that to Cairo. And a motorcyclist is on the other side, and they start waving him down, and the motorcyclist stops, and he calls out to Lawrence, "Who are you?" And then he asks it again. Well, he asks again.
Right.
And it ends on the moment ends on Lawrence's face, and he doesn't respond.
Who are you?
We cut to Lawrence and the kid are in Cairo.
So, that motorcyclist. I don't know if it's actually him on set. It might be an extra, but the voice, the dub is the director David Lean shouting, "Who are you?" Which thesis stuff, man.
I think that's my thesis on this movie.
Yeah.
Is that, and that was kind of what led me into, you talked about at the intermission. I was like, it depends on, basically, this movie hinges on David Lean's answer to that question. Because Lawrence can't answer that question, but David Lean has to. But I love that the first half of this movie basically gets to the end, and the director himself is asking the main character, "Who are you?"
And we cut away before an answer.
We cut away before an answer.
We go straight to Cairo.
And I just love that. I mean, when we talked about it, I brought up, Scorsese and Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
Of like, I love when a director places himself within the story, within the narrative, basically to metatextually either provide context to the audience or kind of explain what drew them. They kind of show why they made this movie, right? In Scorsese's case in Killers of the Flower Moon, he's basically apologizing that he's the one who did it. He's kind of, alleviating his conscience, But David Lean here is just like, who are you? Like, he's exploring. Like, that's just so...
I love it. I love it so much.
It's really great.
That same scene has a very interesting editing technique, which is the use of L and J cuts of the audio of the scene previous or upcoming overlapping with the footage from the other scene, which was kind of inventive in the 60s. It wasn't being done a lot, but Ancoats, they do that of like, it cuts to his face, "Who are you?" And then you hear the tram bell before we cut to the footage of Cairo.
Yeah.
And there's a few moments of that.
Yeah. So the first half doesn't end there. We see them arrive in Cairo. They arrive, they enter, like the canteen for the soldiers, and they all kind of look at Lawrence funny. They're like, "You can't bring this kid in here." And he's like, "We would like a lemonade." He's like I love the tone with which O'Toole is kind of bringing to this moment of like, so quiet, so somber here.
Just strung out,
Just absolutely wiped out. They come in, they kind of ask Lawrence some questions, and Lawrence is like, "Yeah, I took Aqaba." And they're like, "What? Who told you to take Aqaba?" And he's like, "Nobody did. I just figured it was the good move." Yeah. And he explains himself to the new general.
Because there's a line in there that I love so much, because they're in like the officer's mess. And he's like, "We've taken Aqaba." And he's like, "Wait, who? Who's taken Aqaba?" He's like, "The Arabs
we
have. Our side in this war has. We have."
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
He meets with Allenby for the first time, who's kind of the new... Murray's gone, and Allenby is the new kind of head over this whole thing. And he kind of listens to Lawrence and goes, "Yeah, that makes sense." It's like, "Great, cool.
Nice work."
And then he's like, "So when are you going back?" And Lawrence is like, "I'm not. Please don't make me go back to war. I killed 2 guys and I liked it."
Yeah. Oh, that's... God.
And I know that I'm summarizing it.
Yeah. Right.
But speak on why this is his best acting moment.
I think it's his best acting. It's this slow push in on Peter O'Toole talking about, because he's like, "I don't want to go back." They're like, "Well, why not?" He's like, "I killed people." And like, "Hey, look, we've all, like, I get it. It's okay. This happens. You're going to be fine. Like, I know it's hard." And he's like, "You don't understand. You're not hearing me."
Well, and then Allenby has a different reading of it. He goes, "Oh, of course I understand."
Yeah.
Like, it's a different thing.
Totally.
And then Lawrence literally has to be like, "I liked it."
Yeah.
And Allenby's kind of like,
"You're tired." He's like,
tired.
He's
You're
like,
fine.
you need rest. Like, he won't address it. He doesn't talk about it. But just, I love to, again, like, part of why I can go with Lawrence as a character as it goes is like those little moments. The fact that, Dowd was an accident, but he says, he's like, "I killed a boy." Yeah. Like, I killed a young boy, and he holds that responsibility in himself the same way that he gunned down Gazim.
And he liked killing Gazim. He liked executing Gazim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good acting.
Yeah. Again, it's the Paul Atreides thing, you know,
is.
which obviously people have mentioned on Letterboxd.
I think, was it during the intermission or afterwards? You're like, so it's just Dune? We just watched Dune?
I was like, so this is Dune. This is just Dune and Dune Messiah.
Yeah.
In which the white savior goes, hey, if I really become the white savior, I'm going to lose my mind and be evil. And people go, nah, sounds good to me.
Hey, be white savior.
He's like, hey, if you're going to let me, as my review says, the government-sanctioned white savior. He's like, please don't make me do it. I don't want to be the white savior. And they go, no, you're going to be really good at it. He goes, I know I'm going to be good at it. That's what I'm worried about. So again, I was not expecting that. I wasn't expecting Lawrence to have a conscience about what he's doing and who he's becoming. I like that every time he goes to the government, it's like, I don't know, guys. And in this instance, they're like, you're a major now.
Yep.
And
congrats, promotion.
What do you want to continue working for us and doing good work out there? And he asks for all these things, especially for kind of the Arabs, including
He's like,
artillery.
We want artillery. Mm-hmm.
We want money. We want this. And they're like, we'll give you the money. We'll give you all this. And then later.
And they say yes to the artillery, too.
They say yes to the artillery, and then they leave. Hit like Allenby and Dryden, and I think maybe Brighton is there, too.
I think so.
And the three of them are walking away, and Allenby's like, Dryden, we're not going to give them artillery, no. And Dryden's like, no, because it would make them independent. Like, artillery is independence. And they go, yeah, so we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the first half.
Yeah, and they say, I don't know the exact phrasing line, but I just think it's really interesting where Allenby's like, well, then I can't give them artillery. He's like, well, that's for you to decide. So he's like, no, it's not, thank God. I have orders. Not like that poor devil. He's riding the whirlwind.
Yes.
And that's intermission.
That's a great point. Yeah. Thank you.
So while at intermission, there are two little intermission-y notes of research that I have.
Ooh, okay.
So first off, David Lean and producer Sam Spiegel hated each other, just could not stand each other, to the point that Lean would choose locations that the producer either couldn't get to or wouldn't want to go through all the hassle to get to. He's like, I don't want him on my set. We're going out in the middle of nowhere. Sam isn't coming. So they shot the first half of this movie first. And the second half was being written as the first half was happening.
Wow.
Interesting thing that happened was one of the screenwriters, Robert Bolt, he was in London and he was protesting the nuclear bomb. He was part of a protest saying, hey, we don't like nuclear energy and bombs. Like, don't do this. He got arrested and he was in jail for a day, and part of what happened was he was going to be there for like a month. He got sentenced to jail for a month because there was something in the British government at the time where you signed a piece of paper. There's a name for it. I don't know what the name is, but you basically signed a piece of paper saying, hey, I did a bad thing. I promise I'll never do it again. And it's in writing, right? And he's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to sign that. Sam Spiegel was so upset. He flew back to London, came to the jail, and forced Bolt to sign this paper, and Bolt never forgave him for it. He made him sign the paper, got him out of jail after like a week, and Bolt never spoke to him again. Because he's like, you made me compromise my principles. Like, you talked me into something I didn't want to do so that I could write your stupid movie. Wow. I was just really upset about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other piece of info I have about this is that they edited the second half of the movie first, which I thought was interesting. They started with the second half when they got to the editing room. And also, yeah, nobody on the production team, like on the post-production team, not David Lean, not Ann Coates, nobody saw the finished film until the premiere because they didn't have time. They're like, we saw the first half, we saw the second half.
Wow.
We didn't do it all in one sitting until we saw it in theaters.
Wow.
Which is wild to me.
Wild.
Yeah. That's all I had.
And at intermission, I got some Sour Patch Watermelon, and Parker got Milk Duds.
Indeed. And I revealed to Max that you don't chew Milk Duds, you suck on them. Because he said they hurt his teeth.
Yeah, well, sometimes they're too hard.
They are.
That's great.
Yeah.
So that was intermission. Mm-hmm. Jackson Bentley, remember him? I didn't. He arrives in... I did not remember until at the end, Parker was like, no, that was the same guy. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, because it's like Allenby Bentley and Murray are all at the
are
funeral.
all at the funeral. Yeah.
And all of them are
remember
like,
that.
I don't know him.
That was like 2 hours ago. How was I
That was
supposed to
2
remember
hours.
that? 2
Yeah,
hours
fair.
and 15 minutes ago.
Fair.
Jackson Bentley. Remember him? I didn't. Arrives in Cairo to meet with Faisal and inquires about Lawrence. And they have a conversation, and Faisal's basically like, okay, so what you're saying, because Bentley's from Chicago, and he sounds American. He's very
Windy
American.
City.
It was kind of wild to have an American show up in this movie. I was like, it threw me off a little bit. But Faisal is basically like, you're asking if Lawrence can be the hero to inspire your country to join the war. Like, and I love Bentley's response where he's like, all right, yeah.
Yeah,
like, yes.
yeah, you
but
caught me.
he's initially like, fuck you. You know, he's like, he's kind of disgusted, and then he's like, but yeah.
Yeah.
And then Faisal's like, well, if that's the case, then yes, he's your man. Hard cut to, boom, Lawrence and the gang are blowing up Turkish railways and making off with the loot.
So the thing about this train shot, they couldn't plan it in advance. It was basically they had to do it in such a way that they could derail the train, then put it back on the tracks and do it again. So they have multiple cameras filming it all at once, and they have one that they're like, okay, we think it's going to stop here. So we'll put the camera approximately here. It didn't stop where they thought it was going to, which leads to that really great shot in the movie of the camera just getting enveloped by smoke and dust as it like careens towards camera.
Oh,
yeah, that was kind of an accident. They were supposed to be a lot further away.
I love that. That's beautiful. Just failing, and it looks awesome.
It looks dope.
Because who could plan that? No. Bentley is now in the gang. He's taking photos. And it's a great sequence. It's a great little sequence. Lawrence starts dancing on top of the train, which I love. Like, he kind of steps along, and everyone's watching. Like, his shadow's on the ground on the desert. This is like my favorite shot in the movie.
I love that shot.
It's on the ground, and everyone's following him along, but it looks like they're following his shadow.
Yeah.
It's just fantastic. It's a fantastic shot. He gets shot by a guy covered in train oil.
Yep.
And they kind of come and puts a sword in his head or whatever. And Bentley's like, well, I've never seen that before.
Never seen a man killed with a sword.
Never seen a man killed with a sword before. You know? I love Bentley's line of like, yeah, pictures, baby, or whatever he says. That's my baby. It's just like, all right, man.
Yeah, it's myth making in real time. You know?
It really is, yeah. But I just love that his approach to literally taking a picture of a man, he's turning into an idol.
Yeah.
He's just like, that's my baby, yeah.
That's my baby.
Like,
yep.
Yeah, it's great. Slowly but surely, everybody goes home. There's a lot of talk in this first little bit. I don't think we have to really dive into it too much, but just, Brighton's there, and he's like, so Lawrence, seems like everyone's slowly going home once they have like a big
like
clock
you have
from the
an
train.
attack, you do looting, and people leave.
And like a good chunk of your gang leaves.
Yeah.
And he's like, they'll come back together, don't worry. And he's
They'll
like,
come back for me.
They'll come back for you? And he's like, yes. And they're like, okay.
All right.
They don't. Everyone just starts leaving.
Yeah, everybody just kinda goes.
Auda leaves, and he's like, well, I got what I came for, and now I'm going home. And he's like, Brighton, you'll do the same thing. And Brighton's like, no, I won't. And
I love that line. It's just so good.
Yeah. He's like, what does he call him? He says he's a fool or something, right?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact phrasing.
He's like, then you're a fool, basically.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, everybody goes home. Lawrence doesn't have very much of an army. It's winter now. It's a small group of people in a cave. Ali is still there. His ride or die. And Ali's like, what are we doing? What are you going to do? And he's like, I can still take Damascus. And he's like, what?
We've got 10 people.
We got 10 people. And he's like, all we need is me, basically, right? That's kind of his attitude, is he's like, I'm an Arab. I can do it. And they're like, you'll pass as an Arab? He's like, give me dirty robes, and I can.
Yeah, and like Ali, I can't remember the exact phrasing he uses. He makes something, he's like, you ask them to perform miracles for you. Ask them to walk on water. And Lawrence walks into the night, he's like, my friends, who will walk on water with me? And they're like, fuck you.
Yeah, like the effect is diminishing.
Yeah.
But he still believes that he's this godlike figure of sorts. You know, he's bought into his own hype.
Yeah.
He decides to try anyway. And he and Ali are just in Damascus. This is Damascus,
This
right?
is Damascus.
Okay.
They're in Dara. It's south.
Oh, sorry. They're in Dara. Okay. So they're in Dara, and they're walking along. And this is my favorite line in the movie. Got a big laugh from me.
Yeah.
Of the police see him, and he's wearing robes, but he's clearly just a white man.
He's a white dude.
Yeah. Not unlike Alec Guinness.
Not unlike Alec Guinness.
And they see him, and they keep walking, and Ali's like, Lawrence. And Lawrence is like, I'm invisible. walk on. Like, I just, right? Because he says, I am invisible, walk on. And they're like, hey, they're calling out to him, and he's like, walk on.
Yep.
They stop them, and they take Lawrence to jail.
They don't take Ali.
Ali. No, they
just tell him to
take
get
Lawrence, because Lawrence is lined up with several other people.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of general-ish character kind of comes
governor.
out. He's the governor.
Hadim Bey.
Yeah, and he's what is he looking for?
He's looking for Lawrence, but
Okay.
he doesn't think Lawrence is Lawrence, because he says a line, he's like, that would be too easy.
Yeah,
this would be too simple.
This would be too easy. Yeah. Which is just probably cuts even deeper to Lawrence. Is like, Lawrence wouldn't be this dumb. And Lawrence is like,
he wouldn't be this stupid.
I am this stupid. Strong sexual assault vibes.
So I looked it up. He was sexually assaulted in real life during this when this happened.
That makes sense.
So the record was that the governor tried to make love to him. Lawrence resisted, upon which he was turned over to a gang of soldiers to be tortured and raped. And so the film cuts around that because it's the 60s.
But it gets it across.
It does.
In the way that it's shot, in the reactions from the guards as they kind of restrain Lawrence, and in the governor watching, which was a really unsettling moment of they start flogging him.
Yeah.
And then we hear the governor's cough, and Lawrence kind of turns, and the camera shows the governor's standing in the doorway watching this happen.
And as it goes on and we stay on the governor, like his cough, the way they described it in the documentary, they say his cough increases to a climax.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Effective filmmaking.
Yeah.
Also, I liked this moment for Lawrence's not minding of pain giving way. It almost felt like that was kind of part of his hubris as well. Like, this is truly, in classic fashion, the Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah.
In that he is reminded that he is white. He is reminded that his behavior is so dumb that the governor would think that it isn't Lawrence, because it wouldn't be this easy. It wouldn't be this simple.
Yeah.
And at the end of that also, Lawrence feels pain that he cannot ignore. I think they strip him of like everything in this moment, including his identity that he'd taken on. Like, it's a very effective moment. Like, on every level, he is being stripped down and away from what he's built himself up as. Lawrence returns to the British, and once again is like, please, I don't belong. He has a moment with Ali, I'm sure you maybe want to talk about, where Ali's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm leaving. I'm not one of you. Like, I shouldn't be here. I need to return to my people.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's like, I can't remember the exact phrasing. There's something along the lines of like, Ali talks about, he's like, you said nothing was written. And Lawrence opens his shirt and he grabs a piece of it. He's like, this decides what is written. This decides who we are. This decides our fate.
Well, this decides what we want.
Thank you. That's
because he says, this isn't what you want. He's like, this decides what we want. And he's talking about his skin color. Yeah. So then he returns to the British and once again is like, please, I don't belong with them. I'm white. I'm ordinary. He's like, had this realization of, he's like, I'm not invincible. I'm not a god. I'm not an Arab. He's like, what am I doing? I can't do this. And he's like, and also my hubris is really getting out of hand. They think I'm extraordinary. And I love basically Allenby's response is just, you are. And he goes, I know I am. That's the problem.
That's what you're not listening. Yeah.
And basically I've written here, he is reassured of his special white guy powers. And uses his standing with the Arab tribes to bring the army together for the big push on Damascus. Because he's like, just do this one last push for us, Lawrence, please. Help us take Damascus as you promised us you would. And they just, I don't know, they reassure him of his special. I like that this movie is like, the white savior guy's like, guys, I really don't think I can do this. And they're like, no, you are the white savior. We promise. That's who you are. We need you to be that. So you're going to be that.
Crazy to me that scene was cut. A lot of that scene just isn't in. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's wild. I love the blood appearing on his back and that kind of keying in like Allenby, what's kind of happened to him a little bit. Yeah,
Allenby, he has a shift there for sure. Also, a super quick side note, and this is more for you than anybody else. I've got pulled up like all of the cuts that were made because I was curious how much of that scene was. I totally forgot to mention. Right before intermission, when he comes back and he looks up and sees everybody in the balcony looking at him, it does that spin transition you love. That wasn't in there. That was cut.
Sure, of course.
Sure, of
Hey,
course.
why not? You know,
why not? Why not the coolest transition?
I love the spinning transition.
Yeah.
Although
Anyway.
I think I'm partial to the Sky one earlier.
The Sky
in
one's really
the first
good.
half because that one's really good. That one's like just so subtle and so clean.
Yeah.
Way to go, Ann Coates.
Killing Anne.
So then a key part of this is that the army is more motivated by money than the cause. Like, that's just a fact of this moment. But he says, they'll come together for me.
And he frames him behind like a mosaic of like a Greek god or something.
Yeah.
I don't know who it is.
Yeah.
But, some Adonis
Also,
figure.
I didn't say it quite, but his white robes at the start of the second half, where his hood is removed, or like, the head covering is removed, it makes him look like Caesar. It makes him look like a Roman emperor, and I think that was a really great costuming choice. There's a big massacre on Turkish forces along the way, and I've written parentheses, bad. Because they're on their way to Damascus, and all like Allenby and Dryden are like, I think he'll get there before us.
Right.
Unless he runs into the Turks. And then that's what happens.
Yeah, and Ollie's been on edge because when Lawrence comes back, he's got an entourage of bodyguards. And Ollie's like, these are like the scum of humanity. Like, these are not good people. He's like, I don't care.
Because it's implied that they're not just bodyguards, they're like men for hire, like killers, basically. Yeah. They are like not honorable men. Mm-hmm. Right. And again, I love this moment of Ollie kind of falling. He's like, I can't, like, he's falling out of love with him a little bit. He's like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And Lawrence is just so shaken by everything that's happened that he's hired. Like, he needs this insulation. I love that you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Mercenaries. That's the word.
Mercenaries. I was like, it's not hitmen. Mercenaries.
There's a word. Yeah. Mercenaries.
Yeah. On their way, they kind of crest over this hill and they see, well, first we see some of the only women in this movie who are dead. Women in this movie are women who sing a little song as the armies head out in the first half. Mm-hmm. That's probably sounds really dismissive to call it a little song. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be dismissive of it.
No, but I know what you mean.
And then there's these dead women in the town that the Turks have just massacred. And then there's the nurses at the end. And that's it. It's very much a guy movie. Which historically makes sense. It's not like I'm like, I need women in this movie. It's just like, again, something to acknowledge about this movie.
Yeah.
But anyway, we pan across all this destruction that this retreating army of Turks have done. And they crest over this hill. And Ali is like, Lawrence, we can't do this.
Let's go around them.
Let's go around them.
They're beaten. Look at them. Like, they have nothing.
Yeah. We need to go to Damascus, and they're beaten, Yeah.
And one of the mercenaries is
Lawrence hesitates, and one of the mercenaries is like, "Oh boy,
we're gonna kill some killing.
Let's kill some people." And then one of the men in the army runs off, and Ali says, "This was his village," or Auda says, "This is his village. This was his village. They just massacred." They kill him immediately, and that spurs the entire army. The Turks kill him immediately, and the entire army rushes forward. And Lawrence is like, "Let's go."
No prisoners.
Yeah. And then it's literally just the 40 Days of War from Furiosa, because this movie has influenced everything. And I have seen 3 Furiosas this year. I've seen 3 Lawrences of Arabias this year.
Indeed.
Of Dune Part 2, Furiosa, and this. But this is one of those movies where when I watched this, I was like, there's so many things that this movie birthed, basically, that people have been pulling from this movie and referencing this movie my entire life. And I just didn't know. Right. And so that's why I make the Furiosa reference. It's just like, that's what this is. This is the origin point of so many things to come. Mm-hmm. One of those sacred texts, as they say. Anyway, bunch of killing. Bad, Parker. Pretty bad. And after all this is done, we get the shot of Lawrence looking at himself in the knife. Right? Is this where we see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And he kind of sees himself covered in blood, and Ali's like, Lawrence, are you good? Like, he's kind of checking on him. Kind of transitions into night, and I love this interaction. I know that you were kind of like, all right, to the character, not about the movie, but I love this where Bentley rolls up in a car. Maybe it was a Bentley, who knows? He rolls up and he kind of sees all of the destruction and devastation. He says, Jesus wept. Mm-hmm. And he repeats himself to himself twice. Ali rolls up to Lawrence. I also love the shot of Lawrence before Bentley's arrival, where his eyes are just kind of glimmering in the darkness, and it's really spooky. Like, it's they make him really scary. And Ali kind of sidles up on a horse and says, "Does it surprise you, Mr. Bentley? Surely you know the Arabs are a barbarous people, barbarous and cruel. Who but they? Who but they?" Which, again, feels so important to David Lean's vision of this movie. Yeah. Is like Ali literally there to say that and look directly at Lawrence. And kind of just talking about, like, basically the British involvement in this region, right? Mm. Like, we are not barbarous. You are just as bad as us,
Because
right?
I can't remember if this is before this scene or right after, but there's a scene where they see the artillery like flashes from a distance, and Ollie is like, God help whoever's under that. And Lawrence is like, it's Turks. He said, God help them.
God help them. Yes. I forgot when that moment was too, but that's a good.
It's around here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Ollie says that, and then Bentley looks at Lawrence and says, "Oh, you rotten man." I really like his delivery of it. He says, "Here, let me take your rotten bloody picture for the rotten bloody newspapers." And when we talked about this, you were kind of like, dude, you built him up.
Sure.
But I think a key part of this line is the rotten bloody newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
This is Bentley fully taking in his involvement in it.
Yeah, his culpability.
His culpability, and the culpability of the media, the culpability of everyone.
Right.
This moment is key to this movie not just being the white savior movie.
Totally.
This is, like, you're terrible. Like, it's condemning him. And I would be very curious to know if, like, how the British public responded to this movie, if they still considered Lawrence a hero.
Yeah.
Was this like a kind of a revolutionary thing to make of like condemning him and condemning the British actions in World War One?
Yeah.
Because the 60s feels like they would still, like, early 60s still feels like there would be a lot of pushback from, like,
right.
the institution.
Right. We're in a place where the screenwriter got arrested for protesting the nuclear bomb, you know?
Yes.
Like, that's the England that exists when this movie comes out.
I really like that the screenwriter, when he was working on part 2, got arrested for protesting the nuclear war, and there's the line here of, like, God help whoever's under that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Interesting.
Lawrence Arabia based, question mark?
Based? Lawrence?
Oh no. We can't, Parker. Lawrence's men do beat Allenby and the British to Damascus. Allenby and Dryden arrive in what looks to be just like, it's got the vibe of they're entering their Airbnb. I know it's probably like a hotel or like a convoy or, but it just feels like they get there and they just immediately kind of set up, and like Dryden's reading a book and like,
yeah.
But they're basically like, oh, and Lawrence is here, and Allenby's like, so he did it, and they're like, yeah, and they also let me see here, set up the Arab National Council, who we now have to work with, and Allenby's like, no.
I don't think we should.
I don't think we should. No, I don't think we will. We go to the Arab National Council, and Lawrence is just fully like banging a gun as a gavel in this hall that they've overtaken, and is like, guys, please just like work with each other. It's like these different tribes are in there. And I was worried when this scene came up that the conclusion of the movie was going to be, it's unfortunate that the Arabs are just too crazy to be taught how to be peaceful, Yeah. Which is obviously not what David Lean was going for, but I was still nervous about where it was going to land on this group of people, especially when there's brownface in the film. I was still worried there was going to be this...
is still haunting you.
Yeah, he's still haunting the narrative for me. In fact, he's appeared a few times in this half, but I don't remember. But like, I was still a little nervous about that. But then also thinking about this scene, I also just think of like all the footage we have of like the British Parliament now, and just someone yelling for order as they all yell over each other. Like, this is just what government is. And it feels more like a condemnation of government almost, in a way. Not necessarily fully. It's not like David Lean is some sort of anarchist. But it's like, this is difficult. Yeah. Like, it's difficult. And also, the British refuse to provide technical utilities to the Arabs, and they're bickering, and it's just not working, despite Lawrence's best efforts. And he's like, Prince Faisal will be here soon. He can sit in this big throne right here. But it's just not working. Yeah. And we kind of see, I love this scene. And this is a line that I forgot to mention when we finished the movie the first time, of of Lawrence being like, are you going to go back to, are you going back? And Ali says, no, I shall stay here and learn politics. And Lawrence says, that's a very low occupation. And Ali is like, I had no thought of it when I met you. You tried. And like, there's a pause there as Ali lets that sink in of like, if that's a low occupation, then why did you do any? Like, you brought me to this. You inspired me to do this. Right. And now you're like saying, well, that's terrible. And he's like, dude, what the hell? Like, what's your that's kind of the vibe I get from that. And then there's a pause, and then he says, you tried very hard to give us Damascus. And Lawrence says, it's what I came for. And that would be something. And Ali agrees. He says, yes, much. And then he leaves, and that's the last time they speak, right? Yeah. Yeah. It's a breakup.
It's a breakup. It's a breakup scene. Because he's crying. He's bawling his eyes out as he leaves.
When Ollie leaves, he's crying, and Auda, who left earlier, sees him crying and says, well, he says, you feel for him. Or he's like, is he your friend? And he's like, shut up, basically. And Auda's like, you love him. Like, he says the word love, and Ollie is like, no, I fear him. And Auda's like, then why do you weep?
Yeah.
And I don't have it here because the screenplay I was reading off of. Fun fact, Genius has screenplays, apparently.
Sure.
I had no idea.
Thanks, Genius.
While I was researching this, but thanks, Genius, the website. I would love it if they just, like how they do the lyric videos, where like artists will come in and talk about their lyrics and break them down. If they just had a screenwriter come in, just break down their entire screenplay.
Why not?
It's like 4 hours long.
Yep.
But yeah, I just think that's a really...
And he responds in some way where he's like, he talks about Lawrence hating and fearing himself.
Yeah, he's like, well, if I fear him and hate him this much, or if others do, then imagine how much he fears and hates himself.
Yeah.
And it's just a very, I don't know, the Ollie and Lawrence relationship in this movie is like fascinating to me. And you have thoughts on Omar Sharif's casting and just this relationship alone. Right?
Like I firmly feel that like this relationship and friendship and connection is the cornerstone of the movie. Like Ali is both a stand-in for the Arab people's relationship to Lawrence and his relationship to them. Them warming up to each other and becoming amicable and then having a falling out is a complete tracking of the entire social political landscape of the film and Lawrence's place in it.
Yeah.
And so Ali as a stand-in for all of that, I think works so well. And with that in mind, I genuinely think, and maybe history would disagree with me, I don't know, I really do think this movie would not be as well regarded as it is if it was a white actor in brownface playing that part. I think that relationship would fundamentally fall apart if that was an Alec Guinness. You know what I mean?
Like, Alec Guinness being in this movie at all is like a problem. Yeah. But if that problem also extended to this core relationship where Ali is basically kind of representing Lawrence's relationship with that entire region. And like we see through Ali's eyes why they would have liked him, why they would have let him lead as much as he did, why they would have trusted him, and why they ultimately fell out of love with him. Like we see all of that, and it works because a lot of that is, like you just said, like vestaged through Ali. And if that was hinging on a white man doing an accent and wearing brown face, that
it'd
fundamentally,
be a farce.
It makes it toxic.
Yeah.
And it's something that I told you about, of like the one thing that doesn't quite work for me with this movie is the attempt to condemn the British, especially when like Faisal has anything to say about it or like anything like that, where they're like, and the British are bad too. And I go, right, but you're also like putting the British in these roles of these people. Yeah. And like, just think about how much more effective this movie would be if Faisal also was a person from that region, totally. Like if he was being portrayed in a way that was authentic and not at all like racially, diminutive and, like it's just, like that's what kind of bums me out the most about this movie is I'm like the Ollie and Lawrence stuff works so well that I wish the entire movie, like I wish that Auda and Faisal were also, which is, and it bums me out about Auda specifically because he's such an integral part of the story and genuinely, like, to his credit as an actor, as a person, I think Anthony Quinn is doing a good job. He's doing a lot better than Alec Guinness. He is much better than Alec Guinness in this movie. I would equate it to, if we're talking about actors who make it work, even though they shouldn't be in that role, I would equate it to what's the actor's name who plays Sallah in Raiders? John Rhys Davies. It's like that's a really good comparison, actually. Like they feel very similar to me, where it's like they're playing kind of not similar characters, but like similar enough characters in their role with the lead that it's like, but they both do a good enough job that people have just kind of been like, yeah, that's bad, but he he did a good job, and like, it still sucks. I'm not trying to excuse that. I'm not trying to excuse, Davies in Raiders either, but but that's kind of the difference, totally. Is like he's, to his credit, he shouldn't be here at all. No. But to his credit, he is doing a performance that works in the film. Well, to the point, there is actually a very kind of funny story from the making of where
he came on set, Anthony Quinn. They got him all done up in makeup and costume, and they hadn't done that before. And just slowly but surely, like, all of the extras were like, Auda Abatai. Like, they were saluting him, and he got like a mass of people, and they accidentally interrupted a take. And David Lean's like, who is that? Like, what's going on? They're like, oh, they keep calling him Auda Abatai. And he's like, yes, he is. He's like, can we fire that guy Quinn? Can we get this dude, whoever he is? Because he's like, you know, a half a mile away. He just sees him with this massive car. He's like, whoever that is, let's get rid of this guy.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. See, that's a kind of a testament to he's good in this movie.
He's good in the movie.
He shouldn't be here, but
he shouldn't be here. But I think he is doing a good job. And I place the blame of the brown-faced decision much more at the feet of David Lean and Columbia and Spiegel than I do at Quinn's feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But again, compared to Quinn, Guinness is like, what are you doing here?
What are you doing, Alec? I like you. You're a good actor. You're doing a bad job in this movie. I think genuinely, it's kind of whatever. He
put 5 hours worth of character study into it, so clearly it should be a great performance. But yeah, this whole ending is fantastic. They go to the hospital because basically the British learn that there's a Turkish hospital here that the Arab National Council is not dealing with. And the British aren't dealing with it either because it falls under the National Council. And they basically find out that basically people are dying and there's like disease.
And the Red Cross is really pissed about it.
Yeah, they're
really
like,
pissed. What are you doing?
Yeah, to the point that there's an officer who arrives at the hospital when Lawrence is also made aware of this. And Lawrence goes to the hospital and looks around and there's a bunch of, like, you know, sickly and dying people.
Yeah.
And Lawrence is kind of looking at all this, and an officer arrives and is like, this is outrageous. And he's like yelling that it's outrageous. And Lawrence just laughs and falls to the ground.
Yeah, the guy hits him because he thinks he's an Arab.
Yeah, and he falls to the ground laughing.
And then I love how long that holds because, like, it's such a shift from, like, laugh to cry to laugh again. Like, he looks so manic and despondent in so many ways. So many ways.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, he's just gone, you know? So, cut to Allenby talking to everybody, and I love the way he delivers the line where he's talking about, well, Lawrence, you're going to go home, and you're colonel, by the way. He's like, and the colonel will return to Britain. He goes, oh, by the way, you're a colonel now. You get a room to yourself, basically, is the reason he's being made colonel. He's like, yeah, so some crazy stuff went down, and you're kind of, we don't need you anymore. We don't
and
like
Lawrence
you
is
anymore.
Like shot in shadow, except for like this slit of light over his eyes.
He is. It's like he's a ghost.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting too because it mimics his robes of covering and then eyes.
Yeah,
you know?
That's a great point. Ugh, good movie.
Good movie.
Allenby is kind of like, you're colonel, go away now.
Yeah,
we don't need you anymore. Beat it. And Lawrence kind of leaves. And then Allenby, Dryden, and Faisal begin to make deals about Damascus and what goes on from here. And I love this inclusion of Colonel Brighton is in the room, who up to this point, you know, he's had a kind of a contentious relationship with Lawrence. But Brighton's in the room, and Allenby repeats his famous line of, well, I'm just a soldier. Good thing I'm not a politician. Those poor suckers. You know, he's like, I don't have to make any decisions. I just do what I'm told.
And Dryden points out the hypocrisy. It's like, you keep saying that.
Yeah, he's like, as you keep saying. But basically they start making deals, and Colonel Brighton is clearly unsettled or disgusted by this. And he's like, excuse me, sir.
Because Faisal's begging for his life, basically. He's like, hey, can you leave us the post office? Can you leave us the telegrams? Like, no, you can't have those things.
Yeah, and Brighton's just kind of like, I don't even know really what his stance is. I don't know what his emotion is, but it's clear that he is unhappy with this.
Right.
And he excuses himself, and he just disappears. He just walks out the door into
Well,
Damascus.
he tries to go find Lawrence, and Lawrence is gone.
Yes, and Lawrence is gone. That's a great point. I missed that.
No, you're good. He just chases after him, and then he can't find him.
Yeah. Where is Lawrence, you might ask? Well, he's leaving Damascus in a British Jeep, and he's got his uniform back on. And the driver's like, going home, sir. You know? He's like, that'll be nice. You know, whatever. British. And I want you to break down these final set of shots, because you love this, and it's great.
So good.
And you had to explain it to me, basically.
So he's sitting in the car with a guy, and the driver's like, we're going home, sir. He's like, what? He's like, home, sir. He's like, oh, yeah. And they pass by some Arabs with their camels walking out of Damascus and leaving the city. From behind them, a British officer on a motorcycle, veers up behind them and cuts in front of them and goes off into the desert. As he passes, a truck full of British soldiers passes by, and the camera follows them and lands on Lawrence. And we just sit there. And I love those series of shots. It's such good visual storytelling of what has happened and what is going to happen. Of the Arabs have now been forced out of their home by the British, essentially. Mm-hmm. The motorcycle that is going to kill Lawrence speeds off into the distance ahead of him, and it's going to catch up with him someday. Yeah. And then the British fully come in to occupy Arabia.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love that series of shots.
Which is also, we didn't mention it, but Lawrence at one point tells Allenby, he's like, yeah, I'll help you take Damascus, but I'm giving it to the Arabs. He's like, the Arabia is for the Arabs, and I'm going to give it to them. Mm-hmm. And this just completely, that was never going to happen. And it's the reveal of like, when you thought you were being rebellious, when you thought you were acting out against the British, you were going against their wishes. You gave them exactly what they wanted.
Right.
And then you were dismissed.
This whole time, from the intro to Lawrence to the end, he has always been an outcast. That's how we meet him. He is a sore thumb. He doesn't fit in. He's awkward. He's, stumbling, all these things. He feels like he is out of place. And all of these things that he always thought that he's like, well, I'm helping the Arabs and I'm going to speak over my superior to tell them, hey, the British are going to screw you over. And all these things he thought he was doing to be a rebel only got him here. It all played back into the people who ostracized him in the first place. Right. And he just looks defeated and empty. And it's just, I don't know, it's a very potent ending for quote unquote the white savior movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great. Good movie.
Yeah, good movie.
Any final thoughts, Parker? Anything else that you have? Anything you didn't touch upon in the summary or before?
I think I got everything I wanted to talk about with it. Just, I don't know.
Great movie.
Great movie.
Glad we watched it. Glad we went to theaters.
Me
Parker
too.
And I drove out to Las Vegas, not to gamble, not to have a night out on the town.
No, to see a film.
To see a film for 4 hours on a Sunday. And it was beautiful. I wouldn't change it for anything, Parker.
It was a good experience. I had a good time.
Experience. Should we get into criteria?
Let's do it.
Okay. I think this is a movie that truly matches Kane.
Yeah.
In historical and technical relevance. As we touched on, it's in the National Film Registry. But also just like you said, your grandparents know what this movie is.
Right. Yeah, I think it was a thing.
I would say the difference is that I feel like a lot more people like our age know Citizen Kane than they might know Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
Just because Citizen Kane is so talked about as that's the greatest film of all time. But I wouldn't necessarily knock Lawrence of Arabia for that. That's not Lawrence of Arabia's fault that young people don't know it. But I think that its influence is felt still to this day. Again, we had like 2 movies that came out this year that feel directly inspired by this to an extent. Like so many things pull from it. Mm-hmm. I think
it passes the Simpsons check.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, if you had asked me, hey, did The Simpsons ever parody Lawrence of Arabia? I'd say yes. I love The Simpsons check. That's like a sub piece of criteria. Did it get parodied on The Simpsons? I think this can. I don't think it. I feel like oftentimes this point becomes less so. Is this more technically and historically relevant than Citizen Kane, and more just becomes if it matches Kane, then it gets the point, right? Because that's such a high bar, and I feel like it does. How are you feeling about it?
I would feel the same way about it. I think, like, again, to your point, it's, maybe one day we'll cover, like, a series of Georges Méliès shorts, and we can fully put the stamp of, like, this was the first of all of it. And it beat Kane there by 30, 40 years,
Yeah, just being like Thomas Edison's short films that just have a guy lifting weights. This is the most influential film of all time.
But like,
I don't know why I pulled Edison. Apologies to Lumiere brothers, to everyone. Ooh. I'm sorry.
But like to that point though, like I think you make a really great point of if it matches Kane, and that's such a high bar, I think it gets the point. And I think this does in so many ways. Like, again, like you and I talked about, they don't make movies like this anymore.
No.
They just don't, and they're never going to ever again.
And in many ways, that's good.
Sure, right?
You
like
know?
that. We have safety protocols, and we don't have to be dying out in the desert.
Yeah,
but
we're not disturbing like a natural landscape.
Right,
but
exactly.
also,
but there's a tactileness that's lost.
It's like when we talked about Titanic, of like, sure, James Cameron gave all those people like colds and got them sick and broke their legs or whatever with water, but
yeah,
water was real.
It's kind of undeniable.
Kind of undeniable.
Yeah,
and it's just kind of that fact of like the craft on display here is unmatched, especially now. Nothing looks like this.
And like something we've talked about in our personal lives. I don't know if it's come up on the podcast before. Of like,
I don't think we've ever had a conversation in our personal lives that I can remember.
Okay, then I guess it has come up on the podcast because I remember having this conversation of something I really love about film and filmmaking is the problem-solving nature of it all. Like, I like the fact that film is a puzzle that you have to figure out how to do something. And you and I experienced that of like, we did a horror show with a ghost, and our ghost was a piece of cardboard with 2 reflective pieces of tape for the eyes. And we've shown a flashlight on it to get the eyes, and it works. That is spooky, you know?
I mean, that's also how we became friends, really, because in one of our film classes, like the film class we had, I was like, I'd written a short and I was like, I don't even know how you do the ending, and then you like unmuted yourself on Zoom and you went this, and then I literally think I was like, oh my god. Like you're just a great problem solver in that way too.
Thank you.
I think that's what it takes to make films, and so it totally makes sense that's what draws you to it, and it's a draw for me too. I think that's what's exciting about it, is to learn how they did that.
Totally. And like, that's not to disparage digital effects, because they have a time and place, and that is also artistry, and also like, how did they do that in so many ways?
Yeah.
But there's something, I love hearing about them making a refrigerator unit on top of the camera, you know? Like, it's things like that. It's like, okay, we have a problem. How are we going to solve it in a practical way and make beautiful images while doing it? And I think that's just very inspiring, and
totally.
Digital allows you to cut a lot of those corners, which doesn't make it less valuable, but you know.
Right. It's the difference between like what Leica does with stop motion and traditional stop motion, where you go, no, Leica still makes incredible films.
Yeah.
But they also use 3D printing and have digital, camera setup that like allows them to digitize a lot of it and kind of mechanize it to make it easier.
Totally.
And that's fantastic. And they are still wonderful. But you lose like the thumbprints on the clay and on the the plasticine.
Yeah.
And that's what this is too. Like, it's just a matter of sometimes old stuff just has that kind of human touch that is still there in current movies, but is lessened by. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So the point goes to
that point.
Lawrence.
I think Lawrence gets the point.
Okay. How well do you think this movie's doing what it's trying to do?
Pretty flawlessly, I think. Like, if it is like... Again, we talked about the similarities at the beginning of if both of these movies are character studies on great monomyth figures, and one of them is loosely inspired by a real person and one of them is a real person, very comparable. I think this does, because we've talked about this so many times. What does Kane want you to feel about Charlie Kane? Like, how does it want you to feel? And I don't know. I haven't been able to figure it out. Lawrence of Arabia wants you to watch a man fall from grace. And it does that immaculately from the get-go, I think,
Totally.
That's my 2 cents.
I agree.
So, point to Lawrence.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
Wow, we've been spoiled the last 2 episodes.
We have.
Of just, is this
the really good
the best movie
we've the best movie we watched? I don't know. It might. Portrait of a Lady on Fire is probably above for me because, hey, no brown-faced Alec Guinness.
Unfortunately for Lawrence of Arabia, brown-faced Alec Guinness has docked at points.
It's a knock. Yeah.
But my performance. No, Alec.
No, Alec. Go home. Go make a Star War.
But I did. Oh, I hate Star Wars. They didn't let me do brown face.
He did blue face.
Ooh. All right. This is such a long episode. This is probably our longest episode, maybe. We'll find out. Final criteria, Parker. And we know the answer.
Yes.
Do you like this movie?
I do like this movie. I like it a lot. And it's...
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, sometimes we phrase this question as, how likely are you to put this on?
See, and that's the thing, is like the only deterrent for me, and the reason I haven't watched in a few years is it's hard to set aside 4 hours for this, you know?
Yeah.
But when I do, I'm so glad that I did. Like, I never
Right.
regret doing it.
Totally.
The length is really the only deterrent, I would say, as opposed to, like, you know, if I'm comparing this with Kane, if I'm going to pick one, if I'm holding both of the movies in my hands, the length is the only reason I wouldn't pick this one.
Right.
But every other reason I would much rather. I'm always happy to rewatch this, you know?
Yeah. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this movie. I think for me, the length and like the commitment and also just like trying to imagine myself watching this at home,
Sure.
I feel like the theater experience was such a core part of this that can't be recreated as easily.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, I would still give the point to Kane over this because I own Kane and I've been thinking about rewatching it lately. Like I just am like, maybe, you know, I kind of want to throw that on. I might check out some of the bonus features, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas with this, I'm like, this is kind of a mass. It's like Thanksgiving. It's like I can only do Thanksgiving once a year, you know? Yeah, but it's good. It's great. When Thanksgiving happens, I'm like, this is great. I love all this love this big feast I'm having.
A big feast.
The turkey's a little dry. One of these dishes is doing brown face. That's crazy. Why is it doing that?
Who put gravy on the smashed potatoes?
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh, we gotta end the episode.
Wrap it up.
Taking a step back, you've given all points to Lawrence of Arabia.
I have, but
this is a rare all three. This is a rare queen sweep for Parker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
So it's taking a step back, you'd still say that this is better.
Absolutely.
Okay. For me, taking a step back, I've got those 2 points. I'd say it's better.
Hey.
I think it's better.
Would you like to say it?
Asterisk, it has brown face in it.
Yeah.
In case we didn't touch on that enough.
Did we hit the point home?
I think we did. We know.
We know.
I think we did.
Turns to the audience. We know.
Turns to the audience. We know. And it's unfortunate. Yeah, no, you made the pick. You can say it.
All right, officially, as the authorities that matter, as two dudes with a podcast, we've decided that Lawrence of Arabia is better than Citizen Kane.
Yep. Wonderful.
Marvelous.
Next time, everybody, it's my pick again. Woohoo.
Woohoo.
Next time, it's All About Eve, 1950, which Parker hasn't seen.
I have not.
Feels good.
Max is always excited when he shows me a movie I haven't seen.
I know that we literally did Central Station like 3 episodes ago, but that feels like an eternity ago. And I've enjoyed the movies you've brought to me, Parker. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah.
But I'm just excited I've only seen All About Eve once.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to revisit it.
Me too. I'm excited to visit it for the first time.
If I'm not incorrect, it's a Joseph L. Mankiewicz film, who is the brother of Mank, the writer of Citizen Kane. There you go.
Okay, there you go.
Anyway, good movie. This is a good movie and good movies to come. So Thanks everybody for listening, and we hope you'll catch us next time. And until then, stay safe.
Take care, everyone.